the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Australia. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup played in 2024. This episode covers Australia's players. I know I'm wearing a Brazil shirt and I feel tremendous shame about that. I think I told the story that my brother bought me an Australia shirt when we were visiting London. And I'm very upset, as I think I've mentioned in another podcast when we did Australian players for the World Cup, that it's gone missing, and I'm very upset. So at least I tried to get the colors right here, but the Brazil shirt, I hope doesn't offend Australians. Anyway, we are doing this media cast in two parts. Part one is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player media casts we've done, so we're aiming for a lighter, more listener-friendly version this time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. We think that will be in late December. And then we'll go back over our list that we built this time and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things, but I'll talk about that more at the end. We have made a separate video on what we'll be covering over the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focusing on the Asian and African Cups, both of those taking place in early 2024. And we've also started coverage of our World Cup 2026 qualifying, looking at the preliminary round of Asian qualifying. Those episodes are out. This episode will have 3 sections. So section 1, where we give some general information on the team. Section 2 is the main part, where we go through the candidates in each position and decide on their likelihood and the reason why we think so. And section 3 will give some closing thoughts and preview part 2 in more detail. So let's begin. And we start with section 1. We're going to talk about the team. So a few comments on the squad. They played in the World Cup in 2022, so their starting team was pretty much solidified then. There are some players who have come into or out of the picture in the games during the fall of 2023. So it's October when we're recording this, and they had games in September and October. The only retirement is one player, Aaron Moy. So Aaron Moy, though he's 33 years old, he's not only retired from international but from club soccer as well. So the last club he played with was Celtic in Scotland, and he was in China and with various clubs in England prior to that. So his career spanned from 2012 to 22, but it actually took him a while to get on the national team, at least as far as tournaments go. So he was selected for the preliminary squads in the 2011 and 2015 Asian Cups, but didn't make the final cuts there, and not even selected for the preliminary squad in the 2014 World Cup. But from 2017 Confederations Cup onwards, he was part of the squad. Oh no, wait, he was actually injured for the Asian Cup in 2019. But he was a starter in the World Cup in 2018 and 2022, and he is not available for them for this tournaments. The next thing we'll look at is club affiliations of the players. So in the past, they have had some players with top-tier clubs. For example, Premier League in England, but they don't have that anymore, although a lot of them do play for kind of second-tier clubs. And these would be kind of at the level of the Championship League in England. So there are a couple there, Leicester City and Middlesbrough, for example. And outside of England, teams at a similar level in Alkmaar in the Netherlands, Standard Liège in Belgium, Toulouse in France, and Parma in Italy. And not actually that many of them play for clubs in Australia, just a few of them there. Okay, let's move on to their recent games. And we're not concerned with the scores here. We're more concerned with the players. But just to let you know what they've done over the past 2 years, because that's the period we look at when we look at the recent participation of the players. So from January to March 2022, they had finishing off their World Cup qualifiers, so they had 4 games there. However, they had to go through some playoffs to get to the World Cup. Both of those were in June 2022. So the first one was the Asian region playoff against UAE, which they won. And the next one was the Intercontinental playoff against Peru, which they won on penalties to reach the World Cup. And you probably know that the World Cup was in December of 2022. So 2022 very much concerned with reaching and then playing in the World Cup. In 2023, they've had some friendlies. So they had 2 friendlies in March. I won't put that in the notes, but I think it may be significant to keep in mind that they only had 1 friendly in June and 1 friendly in September, and then they had 2 friendlies in October. So in terms of kind of building the team towards this cup, the June and September games gave them less opportunity than most of the countries that we've seen. It probably doesn't matter because the team was probably pretty well established from the World Cup. Let's look at the formations that they've been using. And really, they have been using 3 formations over these 2 years that we're talking about. So let's look at 2 of the World Cup games from January to June. 2 of them were a 4-2-3-1 formation. 2 of them were a 4-1-4-1 formation, and 2 of them were a 4-4-2 formation. And that is actually true in the World Cup too. It was 4-1-4-1 in their first World Cup games, and then they switched to a 4-4-2. And the same is true in their friendly since the World Cup, a variety of those formations without going into too much detail. So it's always 4 in the back and usually 1 forward. But in the last 3 games, they have switched to a 4-4-1-1 formation, a bit of an odd formation. Keeping the 4 at the back, but a line of 4 in the midfield, and then 1 kind of secondary striker or supporting attacker, and 1 forward. And we'll see the reason for that as we go through the players. There does seem to be a specific reason. Anyway, the main point there is there's always 4 at the back, and the midfield formation switches up, but doesn't matter that much, I think. And usually 1 forward, although one of the formation has 2 forwards. Finally, we're going to look at upcoming games before we move on to section 2. And they begin 2026 World Cup qualifying in November here. And they have 2 games. The first one is against one of the teams that went through the preliminary round, which was in October. We covered these playoff preliminaries in a separate set of mediacast. So if you want to learn more about Bangladesh, you can check that out. That's Australia's first opponent, and they play them at home. The second one is Palestine away, but with the political troubles there, I doubt that game will take place. At least it wouldn't take place in Palestine. Nevertheless, that's their opponent on November 20th, with a chance of that game being postponed, I suppose. So those are, especially the game against Bangladesh, maybe gives them a chance to experiment a little bit with their team. They don't necessarily have to field their top players because they're likely to beat Bangladesh. They also have one friendly planned, and that's in Bahrain, probably to acclimatize themselves to the Asian Cup in Qatar this time around, and that's on January 5th. They play Bahrain in Bahrain. All right, let's move on to section 2, and we look at the candidates, introduce them, and rate their likelihood of making the cup. So we have Graham Arnold still as the manager, and we rate him probably as a definite because we don't think he'll be fired before the tournament. He's been with Australia for so long. In this go around, he's been Australian national team manager since 2018, and this is his second time managing the national team. He was also in charge as a caretaker manager from 2006 to 2007, and actually took them through the 2007 Asian Cup. So he took them through the 2019 Asian Cup and the 2022 World Cup. And he's been involved quite a bit with Australia as an assistant manager or a manager of one of the underage teams, usually the under-23 team, as well as managing a couple of clubs in his career, both in Australia and one club in Japan. Okay, so that is the manager, Graham Arnold, and we expect him to be there. Let's move on to the next section, goalkeepers. And we'll introduce the player names first, and then their likelihood, and then go over the situation in a narrative way. So we have a definite candidate in Matthew Ryan, or Matty Ryan as he's usually called. Next, we have a likely candidate in Andrew Redmayne, and a possible candidate in Tom Glover. And in this series, we're not really going to put players who are possible or possible but unlikely on the list, or players who seem to be off the squad on the list, unless we see a reason to. We'll just mention those players by names. But I do think I'm going to put the two possible but unlikely candidates on the list here, because I think there's a chance one of them may be selected. Joe Gauchi is the first one, and Ashley Maynard Brewer is the second one, but we're not going to get into their bios. We also have a couple of players who seem to be off the squad, and that is Michelle Langerak and Danny Vukovic. So they're veterans on the team who seem to be gone now. Actually, Danny Vukovic, I haven't received official word that he's retired, but I'm guessing that may be the case. He was a backup keeper for the World Cup in 2022, but he hasn't played since then. Anyway, we will leave those guys off the list and then bring them back on if they do appear on the team again. Meanwhile, let's go to the main candidate and talk about Matty Ryan. So he's the captain of Australia, and he's been with the team since 2012 and has 82 caps. And he's been their starting keeper since the 2014 World Cup, never missing a tournament. Currently playing for AZ Alkmaar in Netherlands, and has played in a lot of different countries. We won't go into too much detail. We consider him a definite candidate because he started 17 of the 19 games over the past 2 years, and just 2 games there that he wasn't selected for. So not only a definite candidate to reach the tournament, but to probably be a starter as well. Andrew Redmayne has been with the team since 2019. Just 4 caps for this likely candidate. He is 34 years old, so obviously difficult to push past Matty Ryan to get on the field. But he was a backup keeper in the 2022 World Cup. That was his first tournament. And he started one of the games over the last 2 years, and he was subbed in for one and on the bench for 15. So only 2 matches that Andrew Redmayne was not selected for. Those matches were the single games they had in June and September. So for a while it looked like he might be off the squad, but he came back for the 2 games in October. And so we consider him still likely. The possible candidate is Tom Glover. He doesn't have any caps for Australia. He's 26 years old. He plays for Middlesbrough in England since recently, since 2023, and was with Melbourne City in Australia prior to that. And he got his first appearance on the bench in June of this year, 2023, and didn't start any games, but he was on the bench for all 4. So kind of looks like he's moving into the 3rd string goalkeeper position. But then the reason we added Joe Gauci and Ashley Maynard Brewer as the possible but unlikely candidates was because Tom Glover's position doesn't seem quite assured yet. So let's finish just with a bit of a narrative. It seems Matty Ryan is clearly the starter. Things were a bit unclear with Gauci and Maynard Brewer seemingly making a bid for the backup spot in the June and September games. But then Redmayne returned in October, and it now seems decided, although in the November games we'll have to see if Tom Glover really does look like the 3rd string keeper. Okay, on to the central defence. And we have 3 definite candidates here. Usually they bring 5 or 6 to the cup. We have Harry Sutar as a definite candidate, Kai Rolls, and Milos Degenak, although we consider him definite to be on the squad for the cup. He's almost certainly going to be a substitute. Thomas Deng is a possible candidate, so we have several possible candidates here. Thomas Deng, Gianni Stensness there, Bailey Wright, Alessandro Circati, and finally Cameron Burgess. So 5 possible candidates there. So we go back and take a look at these players. Harry Sutar is with Leicester in England, and he has 17 caps and an amazing 7 goals for the team. I guess that actually kind of shows a bit about Australia, because we're going to see later that they're a bit lacking in scorers, and obviously getting their goals, a lot of their goals from set plays, from corners or free kicks, with the big central defenders coming up. So Harry Sutar's 7 goals and 17 caps is a bit telling of Australia's offensive style. He was on the World Cup 2022 squad and was a starter in that cup, and he has since actually returned from a 12-month injury prior to the World Cup, so they were very happy that he recovered in time for the World Cup, and he has started 9 of their last 10 games not selected for just 1 match. So Harry Sutar, a definite candidate. Kai Rolls also was a starter in the 2022 World Cup, so that will probably continue. And he got his first cap in 2022, so fairly new to the team, and is 25 years old. He plays for Heart of Midlothian in Scotland. He moved there from Australia in 2022. And he got his first cap, as we said, in January 2022, started 11 of their remaining 19 games, and was subbed in for one and on the bench for two. However, a bit of a concern in that he was benched for the last match, but that doesn't stop us from considering him a definite candidate. The final definite candidate is Milos Degenek, and Milos Degenek has been with the team since 2016 and has 45 caps and 1 goal, and currently playing for Red Star Belgrade in Serbia. And that's actually his 4th time with them. He's been with clubs in between in the USA and in Saudi Arabia. He has been with the team, as we said, since 2016, born in Serbia, and his first tournament was the 2017 Confederations Cup. But he's sometimes been a starter and sometimes been a substitute, and that's kind of encapsulated in his World Cup 2022 performance, where he subbed into games 1 and 2 and then got a starting position for the second 2 games there. So since the World Cup, over the last 2 years, he started 8 of their 19 games from January to over the last 2 years, 8 of their 19 games started, subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 5, including the last 2. So injured for 1 and not selected for 1. Recently, though, he has definitely been a substitute, and we think he's kind of the 3rd string central defender. So he may get on the field here, but we don't think Milos Degenek will be a starter. Let's take a look at the the 5 possible candidates. Thomas Deng, been with the team since 2018, but only 3 caps. He was on the roster for the 2022 World Cup, but he hadn't been called up for the 2019 Asian Cup. And at first he just wasn't selected, and then he had a long-term injury, so a bit of a tough time getting on the squad. He returned after an almost 3-year absence in September 2022 and started 2 of their remaining 12 games and was on the bench for 6. However, he was not selected for the last 4 matches, so Thomas Deng kind of maybe drifting off the squad. He's playing, by the way, in Japan. And looking just like a possible candidate. Gianni Stensnes has been with the team since 2022 and has just 2 caps. He wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2022. Over the past 2 years, he started 2 of their 19 games and was on the bench for 3. But he was injured for the last 3 games and not selected for 11 of those 19 matches. So I don't think that injury is a concern as far as endangering his Asian Cup chances here. But we will update that closer to the time. We'll only kind of point out injuries if it looks like it threatens their selection for the Asian Cup here. Bailey Wright has been with the team since 2014 and has 29 caps and 2 goals. He plays his club soccer in Singapore now, but he was with Sunderland in England before that. And he was part of the Confederations Cup squad in 2017. Actually, was part of the World Cup squad in 2014. That selection was a bit of a shock because it was unexpected. But after the 2017 Confederation Cup, he wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2018 or the Asian Cup in 2019, but he did come back and earn selection for the World Cup in 2022. So over the past 2 years, he started 4 of their 19 games. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 5 and not selected for 7 others, and that includes the last 2 matches. So he was actually out with an injury for the two matches in October. So our first three selections here were not available for the either not available or not selected for the October games. So the next two candidates are maybe coming in just to fill their boots. But in terms of selection for the Asian Cup, it'll be tough to predict who's going to make it. Maybe the November games will shed more light. Anyway, those two candidates coming in are Alessandro Cercati. He doesn't have any caps for the national team. He was born in Italy, and he got his first appearance on the bench in June 2023. So he started one of their remaining four games and was on the bench for the three others. And the other one is Cameron Burgess. He was born in Scotland and is playing for Ipswich in England right now. And he got his first cap even more recently in September 2023 and started two of their remaining games to October 2023 and was on the bench for one other. That was the last game. So actually perhaps looking a bit more likely than Alessandro Cercati, but a lot of it comes down to the state of these players for injury. And I don't think we mentioned a couple of players who now seem to be off the field. Surprisingly, one of them is the son-in-law of the manager, who kind of suddenly dropped off the team. He was a starter in the Asian Cup in 2019, but then not selected for the 2022 World Cup and hasn't played since September 2022. That is Trent Sainsbury. I should have mentioned his name earlier. So he's still playing for his club in Qatar, but seems to be off the national team. It's a bit of a mystery because I don't know why he so suddenly disappeared. He's a veteran with 61 caps and was a starter from the Asian Cup in 2015 onwards. Anyway, we're not supposed to be talking a lot about them, but he's an interesting case, Trent Sainsbury. The other one who seems to be off the team is Harrison Delbridge, and we won't go into detail, but we will add the players' names to the list if they come back in even as a sub for the November games. Okay, so in summary of central defenders, we have three players who are definite: Harry Sutar, Kai Rolls, and Milos Degenek. But the backup situation is very uncertain, with three of the backup players not showing up in October, whether due to non-selection or injury. Those are Thomas Deng, Gianni Stensnes, and Bailey Wright. And so two players coming in and getting a chance as a result of that, and those are Alessandro Cercati and Cameron Burgess. All right, that is central defence, and we move on to the left back, and we have a likely candidate in Aziz Behic, probably really a definite candidate, but we have a small seed of doubt in our mind, which we'll talk about soon. We have two possible I put Bezic in the wrong spot there. We have two possible candidates in Jordan Boss and Joel King. And we have two players who seem to be off the squad, so we'll just mention them by name. One is Jason Davidson, and the other is Brad Smith. So again, if they come back into the picture, we will put their names on the list in part two. Meanwhile, let's take a look at these three players. The first is Aziz Behic, a real veteran with the team since 2012, and 59 caps and 2 goals. And he's basically been a starter ever since the Asian Cup in 2015, and that includes the World Cup in 2022. So over the past 2 years, he started 12 of their 19 games and was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. Just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for, although one of them was the second last match. Maybe that's not enough of a seed of doubt for us to make him a likely rather than a definite candidate. But 12 of their 19 games started will leave him at the definite or at the likely level. And he, by the way, plays for Melbourne City in Australia, having returned from Scotland and Turkish teams over the past few years. Okay, Jordan Boss. Jordan Boss is new to the team since 2023. He got his first appearance on the bench in March of 2023 and started 2 of their remaining 6 games, subbing in for 2, on the bench for 1, and the only game he missed was due to illness. So he plays for Westerlo in Belgium, having recently moved there from Melbourne City in Australia. So just 21 years old, Jordan Boss, and a possible candidate there. The other possible candidate is Joel King, although he seems almost possible but unlikely. He got his first cap in, actually I'll start with his World Cup appearance, because he was selected for the World Cup in 2022. He didn't see any field time during the World Cup, and he has 4 caps for the team. He plays for Sydney FC in Australia, but did play for Odense in Denmark before that, so he has a bit of experience abroad. So he got his first cap in 2022 and started 3 of their remaining 19 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 8, and that's where we saw him. That's where we saw him in the World Cup, was on the bench. He was injured, though, for the last 2 matches. And all in all, in 2023, he has just made 1 bench appearance over their 6 games in 2023. So that's why we say kind of possible, but almost unlikely. But he was injured for the last 2 of those games, and we didn't have any information on the injury. So, yeah, very much in the possible category, because we really don't know what's going on with him. Okay, so in summary, for left backs, we have likely, almost definite candidate Aziz Behic, and among the possible candidates, Jordan Boss and Joel King, and Jordan Boss looking slightly the more likely there. They'll probably just bring 2 to the cup. Excuse me, I had to cough there. Okay, over to the right back position, and we have a similar situation with 1 likely candidate in Nathan Atkinson, and then 2 possible candidates. The first is Ryan Strain, and the second is Lewis Miller. And here too, we have a couple of players who are less likely than that, which we'll just mention by name. And the first one is Fran Karacic. And we consider him possible but unlikely, but he hasn't been selected in 2023, so we'll just mention him by name. And then Ryan Grant last played for the national team in March of 2022, so doesn't make our list here. Let's go back to Nathaniel Atkinson, our likely candidate. And he too would probably be a definite candidate, except for a seed of doubt in our mind. So he's been with the team since 2022, Nathaniel Atkinson, and has 7 caps and 1 goal. And he plays his club soccer in Scotland since 2022. But he was no, he wasn't. That's it. That's all. He moved to Scotland in 2022. He was part of the World Cup squad in 2022. He started game 1, but he was subbed out of that game and lost his starting position. I suspect that's due to injury, because he wasn't on the bench for game 2, and he has been struggling with an ankle injury, which may affect his presence at the at the Asian Cup here, but we'll have to update that when we get to part 2. So over the last 2 years, he got his first cap in March of 2022, started 7 of their remaining 16 games, and subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 5. So only 1 match that he wasn't selected for, but he was out with an ankle injury for the last 2. So sorry, I'm mixing him up with another player talking about his ankle injury in the World Cup. Just to clarify that, he was a starter in game 1, not on the bench for game 2, but on the bench for games 3 and 4. So not sure what happened there. Okay, but if he's fit, we think he'll probably be the starter. But if he's not, it'll be one of these 2 candidates backing him up. The first is Ryan Strain. So Ryan Strain has been with the team since 2022, has just 2 caps. He was born in England and is currently playing in Scotland, having moved there in 2022 from a team in Israel, Maccabi Haifa, in Israel. So he wasn't part of the 2022 World Cup squad. And he got his first cap before the World Cup, though, in September 2022, but just started 1 of their remaining 11 games from that time, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3, and not selected for 5 matches. So, however, we put him, we kind of bumped him up a little bit in as a possible candidate because he has gotten onto the field in 3 of his last 4 appearances, and that would be due to Atkinson's injury. So he is kind of a possible candidate, especially if Atkinson is injured for the Cup. The other one is Lewis Miller. He's brand new. He got his first cap in October of 2023 and started 1 of their 2 remaining games and was subbed in for the other. So he also plays in Scotland and moved from Australia in 2022. And he's a young player, 23 years old. Sorry, not as young as I thought. Anyway, young on the squad because he was brought in just recently. Again, probably to cover Atkinson's injury. So that's the case, and we'll just finish by summarising. Nathaniel Atkinson is probably the starter there, but because of his injury, it opens a bit of the door for Ryan Strain and Lewis Miller, who have both been kind of more involved with the team since Atkinson's injury. Okay, let's move on to the midfield. And we do have a category for general or versatile midfielders, and we have a candidate at this level because Riley McGree kind of moves all around the field. You never know what position he's going to pop up in. I think he's even played as a forward. Yes, he did in 2 games in the World Cup, played as a forward. He's coded as a left winger, but really is all over the pitch. So we consider him a likely candidate, Riley McGree. He's been with the team since 2021 and has been playing quite a bit, 18 caps and 1 goal for the 25-year-old. He plays for Middlesbrough in England and did a short stint in the USA and in Belgium. Has not been part of any squad despite being on the preliminary squad as far back as the Confederation Cup in 2017. The 2022 World Cup was his first tournament, but he was a starter in it. And over the past 2 years, he started 9 of their 19 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4. So that's just 4 of 19 games that he wasn't selected for. That's why we consider him a likely candidate. However, he was on the field only in 2 of their last 6 games. And one of the matches he wasn't selected for was the last match. So that puts a bit of doubt in our minds about him. But we still keep him at the likely level. So he's the only one in that category. He may pop up anywhere in the midfield. But now let's look at defensive midfielders. And in truth, there's not a lot of difference between defensive and central midfielders for Australia, but we'll still kind of go according to their coding. So we saw that Aaron Moy, who was a staple in central defence, has retired, and so these other players are now taking the role. So the definite candidate for defensive midfielders is Jackson Irving. We also have a definite candidate in Keanu Bacchus. We have a likely candidate in Aidan O'Neill, although he will probably be a substitute. And then we have a couple of possible candidates in Cameron Devlin and the returning Luongo Massimo. I'll talk about his situation a bit more here, but is his name Massimo? Sorry, did I say Luongo? His name is Massimo Luongo, if I said it wrong just now. And then one player whose name we'll just mention but seems to be off the squad is Kenny Dougal, last played in June 2022. So let's go back and look at these players. Jackson Irving has been with Australia since 2013. He has 56 caps and 8 goals. So that kind of betrays the fact that he sometimes does play as an attacking midfielder, but he's coded as a defensive midfielder primarily. And he plays for St. Pauli in Germany since 2021 and has played in Scotland and England for quite a while. He's known, so in terms of tournaments, he was not selected for the World Cup in 2014 or the Asian Cup in 2015, but he was for the Confederations Cup in 2017 and has been selected for every tournament since, up until the 2022 World Cup, where he started all 4 games. So over the past 2 years, Jackson Irving has started 13 of their 19 games and subbed in for 2, and basically not selected for 1 match. He missed a couple of matches for other reasons, but a definite candidate when he is available. Jackson Irving. His partner, basically, in the midfield is Keanu Bacchus. And I want you to think for a second back to the formations that we talked about, the 4-2-3-1 and the 4-1-4-1. Usually it was Aaron Moy playing as the defensive midfielder in the 4-1-4-1. But generally there are 2 central midfielders, 2 or perhaps 3. And in their recent formation, the 4-4-2, this will be the 2 midfielders in the middle. I know I'm kind of stating the obvious there, but just if we imagine a formation, we're looking at 2 or 3 central midfielders starting. Okay, Keanu Bacchus has been with Australia just since 2022, and he has 8 caps for the national team, but he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, and he got his first cap in September 2022, shortly before the World Cup, and he has started 6 of their 11 games since that time, subbed in for 4 and was on the bench for 1 other. So ever since his start in September 2022, he has always been called up and is increasingly a starter. And I don't think I mentioned that he plays his club soccer in Scotland for St. Mirren since 2022. Okay, the likely candidate is Aidan O'Neill. And Aidan O'Neill is pretty much brand new to the squad since 2023, but he has earned 4 caps this year. He plays for Standard Liège in Belgium. That's probably one of the bigger clubs that an Australian is on. And he got his first cap in March of this year, started 2 of their remaining 6 games, and was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1 other. So it seems to be working his way into the squad quite nicely, but we consider him probably a substitute rather than a starter. Cameron Devlin is the first of our two possible candidates, and he has been with the team since 2022, but only 2 caps. He also plays in Scotland for Heart of Midlothian since 2021, and he was on the roster for the 2022 World Cup, but didn't see any field time there. And he got his first appearance on the bench, just like Aidan O'Neill. Just like Keanu Bacchus in September 2022, and started one of their remaining 12 games there, subbed in for one, but on the bench for 8 others. So only 2 matches that he was not selected for. So, however, those 2 matches that he wasn't selected for were the most recent ones in October. So he seemed like a likely candidate, at least as a substitute in the tournament. But a bit of a concern that he wasn't selected for the last 2 matches there. So Cameron Devlin at the possible level because of that. Interestingly, they brought in Massimo Luongo, and I'm happy about that because I like him. He was on the team since 2014 with 42 caps and 6 goals. And he also plays for Ipswich in England. We mentioned another player who did. He's been with teams in England throughout most of his career, ever since being on the Tottenham Youth Club since 2011. So he was looking like an important player on the team ever since his selection for the World Cup in 2014. And he was selected for all the tournaments up to the 2019 Asian Cup, but then kind of disappeared and now has returned after a 4-year absence to start the last of their remaining 2 games. So he returned in October 2023 and started 1 game and was on the bench for the other. So recently recalled Luongo Massimo, and I mean, the story there, it looks like he's challenging Cameron Devlin for that position, whether either of them will be brought. Anyway, so in summary, no, I'll summarize after we do central midfielders, because for central midfielders, we only have one candidate at the possible but unlikely level, and that is Alex Robertson, who is actually on the roster of Manchester City in England, but actually is loaned out to Portsmouth in England. So kind of an up-and-coming player born in Scotland. And he got his first cap in March 2023, but didn't start any of their remaining 6 games, but was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. But then for the last 3 matches was not selected. So kind of peeped his head in and then is out again. My metaphor kind of fell apart there. Anyway, Alex Robinson, a possible but unlikely candidate. I will put him on the list just because that club affiliation with Manchester City is impressive. But as far as the national team goes, it doesn't look that good. So now we can summarize. So even though these players may be coded as defensive midfielders, if you think of the 4-1-4-1 formation or the 4-4-2 or the 4-4-1-1, they often use that line of 4 across the midfield, and these guys will play as central midfielders also. So Irvin Jackson, a definite candidate, along with Keanu Bacchus. Those will probably be the 2 starters. We have Aidan O'Neill. And then Cameron Devlin looked like a likely candidate until missing the last 2 games. And Massimo looked to be off the squad. Massimo Luongo seemed to be well off the squad until returning for the last 2 games. So it'll be interesting which of those show up for the November games and which has a better chance of reaching the squad for the Asian Cup. Okay, so I think I put Alex Robinson in the wrong place here. So he is coded as a central midfielder. Let us move on to, well, left midfield and right midfield. I consider these kind of more defensive midfield positions, and Australia has no players coded as left midfield or right midfielders. So we'll move on to left wingers and right wingers, which is a more offensive role. These can be left attacking midfielders, or perhaps even forwards, left forwards, if they use more than one forward. So we begin with Craig Goodwin at the likely level. We also have Matthew Leckie at the likely level. And we have two candidates at the possible level in Our Mabille and in Samuel Silvera. So four candidates, and I'm putting them in the wrong place because they're wingers. And just excuse me a second while I have a drink, take a drink here. Okay, we're back, and we have Craig Goodwin to look at. So Craig Goodwin, a likely candidate. He's been on the team since 2013, but only has 16 caps and 2 goals. He really struggled to get game time and to be selected for tournaments. So since 2013, he's missed the World Cup in 2014, the Asian Cup in 2015 and 19. I mean, he basically missed all tournaments until he finally got onto the field for the World Cup in 2022. And not only that, he was a starter in the tournament there. And he has, over the past 2 years, well, he actually returned after a more than 2-year absence in January 2022. And started 8 of their remaining 17 games up until now, and subbed in for 5 and was not selected for 6 others. But definitely making more inroads into the team than he had before 2022. And currently playing for Al Wahda in Saudi Arabia. That's his second stint with them. But he has been back in Australia, kind of in between. Going back and forth from one country to the other, but mostly in Australia earlier in his career. So Craig Goodwin, a likely candidate. Matthew Leckie, also a likely candidate, but a little less likely, I would say. He's a real veteran with the team since 2012. He has 78 caps and 14 goals, and he's only 31 years old with that long history, just like Matthew Leckie. And he plays for Melbourne City in Australia, but he was with Hertha Berlin in Germany from 2017 to 2021 and played for several clubs in Germany. And he's been a part, unlike Goodwin, he's been a part of every tournament since the 2014 World Cup, where he was a starter, and he was also a starter in the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. And over the past 2 years, he started 10 of their 19 games, and he was subbed in for 1. But he was out with 3 separate injuries over the course of that time for 6 matches, and that includes 5 of the last 6 matches. And so that's the concern with Matthew Leckie, is injury concern. Out with 2 separate injuries there in 5 of the last 6 matches, and that includes a knee injury for the last 3 matches. So that would be September and October matches. So we'll have to check on his fitness. And I should also say that he sometimes plays as a right winger, and we'll see why shortly. Okay, Matthew Leckie. Still, though, we have him as a likely candidate, but a bit of a fitness concern, which we'll update in part 2. The first of the possible candidates is Our Mabille. So Our Mabille has been with the team since 2018 and has 32 caps, and he plays for Grasshopper in Switzerland. He's really been all over Europe, in Spain, Czech Republic, Denmark, Portugal, and so on. And our mobile was not selected for the World Cup in 2018, but was for the Asian Cup in 2019, where he was a starter. He was also called up for the World Cup in 2022, but he was just a sub in that tournament. And he has started 5 of their 19 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 4. So just 4 matches that he wasn't selected for. And he also played as a right winger in his only recent start. But he's actually coded just as a winger because he plays on the left wing and the right wing. I believe he was on the left wing for those World Cup qualifiers from January to March 2022. So I have seen him on both sides. Anyway, I gotta say that looks more like the profile of a likely player than a possible player, but we have him at the possible level, and we'll just leave him there for the time being. The final possible candidate is Samuel Silvera. So he's brand new to the squad with just 1 cap. And he got that cap in September of 2023, not as a starter, but as a sub. So he was subbed in for 2 matches since that time and on the bench for the 1 other. So making some inroads recently is Samuel Silvera. He plays for Middlesbrough in England, recently moving there from the Central Coast Mariners in Australia. So there we have it. Basically, in summary, we kind of have Craig Goodwin and Matthew Leckie sharing this position. Goodwin making inroads into the position, and Matthew Leckie not necessarily sacrificed for it, but moving over to the right side, so still playing quite a bit. Leckie, though, is a bit of an injury concern, which might make room for our Mobile, who is quite possible as a selection anyway, even if both of them were fit. So maybe Samuel Silvera would be more the beneficiary of Matthew Leckie's injury if he's called in to replace him. Let's move over to the right side, and we have a definite candidate and a definite starter in Martin Boyle. And we'll talk about it more, but basically the reason Leckie and others have been playing there was because Martin Boyle was injured. We'll come back to that story. We have 2 possible candidates also in Marco Tilio and in Brandon Borello. And we have a possible but unlikely candidate who I'll mention just by name, but I am going to put him on the list because there is a slightly decent chance of him coming, and that is Nestori Irankunda. Nestori Irankunda, the Tanzanian-born player. But that's all we'll say about him. But we will talk more about him if he comes into the picture a little bit more. But the definite candidate and definite starter is Martin Boyle, who's been with the team since 2018 and really seized the position of right winger over the past over the time he's been there since 2018. He has 20 caps and 6 goals, and he plays for Hibernian in Scotland. It's actually his second stint with them since 2022, but he was with them from 2015 to 22 also. He was born in Scotland and actually played for the Scotland under-16 team. For the Asian Cup in 2019, he was selected for the final squad but injured, and then the poor guy suffered the same fate in the World Cup in 2022, selected or named to the final squad but injured before the tournament. So he has been struggling with a knee injury. But since his return in September 2023, he has started all 3 matches just as he did before his injury. So started 10 of the 19 games over the past 2 years was on the bench for one, and only 2 matches that he wasn't selected for reasons other than injury, and even those might have been kind of fitness concerns. But anyway, he seems to be back, and I really hope for his sake that he makes this tournament, because that's a very unfortunate tournament career for Martin Boyle. And there we go. Let's move on to the possible candidate, Marco Tilio. So he's been with the team since 2022 and has 7 caps, and he's playing for Celtic in Scotland, recently moving there from his team in Australia. And he was selected for the World Cup, Marco Tilio, in 2022, but he was just on the bench there. And he got his first cap in January 2022, started only 1 of their remaining 19 games, but he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 8. He was injured for 2 of them, so it's just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. However, those 2 matches were in October, but it may be that he just wasn't fully recovered from his injury. I think the 2 matches he was injured for were in June and September. So Marco Tilio hopefully will be recovered for the cup. If he is, he's probably a substitute rather than a starter, because doesn't start often. But we have another candidate at the possible level in Brandon Borello, and he plays in Australia, but was with a German team, Dynamo Dresden, in 2021 and 2022. He wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2022, even though he's been on the Australian squad since 2019. And he has 7 caps and 1 goal. So he actually returned after a 15-month absence in March of 2023, so after the World Cup, to start 1 of their remaining 6 games, and he was subbed in for 4 others and not selected for just 1 match. And basically, we'll see when we get to forwards that he is, even though he's coded as a right winger, he seems to be the backup forward right now. But we'll leave that to when we get to forwards. So Brandon Borello, not necessarily a right winger as he is coded, but a possible candidate, probably more at the forward level. So this is the story then on the right wing. We have Martin Boyle as the definite starter, but because he was injured quite a bit, Matthew Leckie played in his position for the most part, including in the World Cup, by the way, on the right wing. And we have 2 possible candidates in Marco Tilio, who was injured for the October games, and Brandon Borello, who actually seems more as a substitute for the forward players. Okay, and now we move on, not to the forwards, but to the forward line. We begin with attacking midfielders, and we start with the likely candidate, Connor Metcalfe. And here we also have Denis Jean-Loup, as a possible candidate. I'm not sure whether he says his French name in a French way or in an Australian way, so maybe Denis Jean-Loup. And we also have Aidan Trustic as a possible candidate at the attacking midfield position. So let's go back and look at these 3 players. So Connor Metcalfe has been with the team since 2021. And has 9 caps and no goals. He wasn't selected for the World Cup in 2022, but I gotta say, since that time, he's become increasingly important, moving from a substitute to a starter. And actually, I think that he is the reason that over the last 3 games, they have changed to a 4-4-1-1 system. So I think he would be that supporting midfielder, supporting behind the forward. I think they've done that to accommodate him. So I think he's becoming more important, Connor Metcalfe. He plays for St. Pauli in Germany. We saw 1 other player with that team. and again becoming more important for the team. Next, we look at Denis Genroux. So he plays for Toulouse in France since 2021. But yes, he was born in France. So he wasn't selected for the Asian Cup in 2019, and I'm guessing he was around because I have a note on him for the Asian Cup in 2019. Anyway, he got his first cap in 2021, and he started 2 of their 19 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4. However, he was not selected for 10, and actually that includes not only the last 2 matches, but 8 of the last 10 matches. So he seems to be in and out quite a bit. So he did return as a sub for 2 matches in June and September of this year, but not selected in October. So not sure where things are at. We'll see if he's selected in November. The other possible candidate was Aidan Krustic. And I was surprised that he was seemed underused in the World Cup. But then it kind of explained now because he went in for ankle surgery in January, which explains that. So he was on the roster for the 2022 World Cup, and he even subbed into 3 games there, 3 games there. And I was wondering why they weren't using him more. But the ankle injury is the concern. Anyway, Aidan Krustic has been with the team since 2017 and has 24 caps and 3 goals. And he plays for Hellas Verona in Italy right now, but he's been with several clubs in Europe, Germany and Netherlands and Austria, and even and in England. And he was part of the squad for the Confederations Cup in 2017. But then not selected for the World Cup in 2018 or the Asian Cup in 2019. And as we said, in the 2022 World Cup, he was just a sub, but now that appears to have been because of his ankle injury. Yes, okay, so he started 5 of their last 19 games over the past 2 years, and he was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 1. And not selected for 3 matches, but that includes the last match. That has nothing to do with the ankle injury. So a bit like Denis Genroux, confusing to kind of figure out what his status is with the team because he's been in and out so much. In his case, the ankle injury adding to the confusion. So nevertheless, 2 possible candidates in Denis Genroux and Aidan Krustic, but the story of the attacking midfield is Connor Metcalfe, who seems to have nailed down the position. Okay, and we have no players coded as secondary strikers, so we move on to actual forwards, and there we have a definite candidate in Mitchell Duke, and we have a possible candidate in Jamie McLaren, and also in Garang Kuol. Actually, we have 2 others as well. Jason Cummings at the possible level, and Nicholas D'Agostino at the possible level. And we do have a player who seems to be off the squad, Adam Taggart, last played for the team in September 2022, but we won't add him to the list. Okay, and you know, we talked a lot in the World Cup mediacast on Australia about their trouble with scoring. We even saw that central defender Sutar is kind of their top scorer. So they're getting their goals from set plays. So really struggling for goals. They did okay in the World Cup, but it's still an issue for Australia where their goals are going to come from. So Mitchell Duke is who they're going with now, but I'm sure he's not scoring as much as they would like. they would hope. So Mitchell Duke has been with the team since 2013, but only has 29 caps during that time. Pretty good scoring ratio with 9 goals. But even though he got his first cap in 2013, he was not on the squad for a long time until the 2022 World Cup. That was his first tournament. He started all 4 games in that cup, and over the past 2 years has started 12 of their 19 games, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2. So just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. So Mitchell Duke now firmly established on the squad. He plays for a team in Japan, 2 teams in Japan over the last couple of years, and has been kind of associated with Japan since 2015. Okay, so Mitchell Duke, but I gotta say, it's kind of in the lack of any other forwards who will score goals for them that he's not only a definite candidate, but almost a certain starter. Jamie McLaren has kind of moved down to a possible candidate. He's a veteran with the team since 2016, but he only has 30 caps. Again, a reasonable production of 8 goals over those 30 caps. He plays for Melbourne City in Australia since 2019, but has played abroad. He was with Blackburn's youth club in England before turning professional. He's been with the team since, in terms of tournaments, the 2017 Confederation Cup, and always selected there, but only in the Asian Cup in 2019 was he a starter. But in the 2022 World Cup was just a substitute. There he did have some personal problems which maybe affected his psychology. We won't get into it. Also at the possible level is Garang Kuol. Sorry, I just want to go back to Jamie McLaren and make the point that he wasn't selected for 3 the last 3 matches and for 5 of the last 6. So he was quite a regular before that, even if he wasn't often a starter. But a bit of doubt thrown onto him due to his recent non-selection. And actually, that's why we moved him down from likely to possible. Okay, now we're ready to move on to Garang Kuol. So he's been with the team since 2022 with 5 caps and 1 goal. Very young player. He's just 19 years old. And he's with Newcastle in England, but he's on loan to Volendam in the Netherlands. And he's actually born in Egypt to parents of South Sudan refugees who settled in Australia. So an interesting backstory to Garang Kuol. And he was selected for the World Cup in 2022 and came in as a sub for a couple of games. He got his first appearance on the bench in September 2022, and he hadn't started any of their remaining 12 games, but he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 3. However, he was not selected for the last 3 matches, so another player who looked likely until very recently, Garang Kuol, but we still keep him at the possible level here. The third possible candidate is Jason Cummings, and he's been with Australia since 2022, just 2 caps and 1 goal for him, and he's currently playing in India, just moved there from Australia. But before that, he had played in Scotland and England, and actually was on the Scotland team in 2017 and 18, earning 2 caps with them, but didn't commit to them and was able to transfer over to Australia. So he was born in Scotland, but has switched his soccer allegiances to Australia. And he was selected for the World Cup in 2022, but only appeared in 1 game as a substitute there. So He got his first cap shortly before that in September 2022 and started none of their remaining 11 games, but was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4. However, he too has not been selected for the last 4 matches. So Jason Cummins also kind of looking likely, but then not in the picture recently. So what's going on here, we may ask. We'll talk about that soon. Finally, though, let's look at the candidate Nicholas D'Agostino. So he has also been with the team since 2022, has 3 caps, even though he's 33 years old. And he plays for Viking in Norway, moving there recently from his team in Australia. So he wasn't selected, Nick D'Agostino, for the 2022 World Cup, and actually returned after a 15-month absence in September of this year, not starting any of their remaining 3 games, but subbing in for 1. However, he was injured for the last 2 matches, so looked like he was getting his chance and then got injured. Probably brought in to replace some of those players who were not selected for the October or for the recent games in the fall. So a bit confusing as to what's going on here, because in summary, we only have Duke Mitchell really as a definite candidate and as a candidate at all, because some of the others are in doubt, even though they're possible candidates. They didn't play recently. So what's going on here? Well, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the right winger Brandon Borrello seems to be the main substitute as a forward. He even started 1 game as a forward. So they're, again, very thin on forwards. I imagine some of these possible candidates will come back. It was Jamie McLaren who subbed in for him during the World Cup, but because he seems to be drifting out of the picture here, Brandon Borrello is taking over that role. But still, a lot of problems in the forward line for Australia. Their forwards not getting as many goals as they would like, and now we have these candidates who are not being selected or who are injured recently. So that seems to be the biggest issue on the team, and actually that brings us nicely into closing thoughts, the first part of section 3. So closing thoughts, we don't see a whole lot of change from the World Cup squad, but we do more in the last couple of months in September and October, with some players not being selected and also some players injured. Most of those will probably recover from their injury, but perhaps the manager is kind of thinking of some last minute changes. And the other closing thought is their trouble with goals and forwards. So really, I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of players brought in November, maybe a couple of new names, and I'm sure we'll see a couple of the possible candidates coming back in for the November games, because, you know, right now they only seem to have 1 forward, but most teams bring 4 or 5 to the cup. Okay, and now let's finish with a preview of part 2. So we will be bringing you that podcast when the final teams are selected. And at that time, we're going to look at notable non-selections. So that would be players we expected to see who didn't make the final squad. Surprise inclusions, so players we didn't really expect to make the final squad who are selected. Any new players, there's always a couple that pop up because of good club play. And finally, we'll give an update on injuries. So we have seen a few injuries here. None of them really seem like they're long-term injuries at the moment, but we need to get closer to the cup to really comment on them. So we will do that. All right, that brings us to the end of Australia. We originally planned to tag on our past, present and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naver Avichan and Pixabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.